Hello and welcome to Journalist Hangout UK, the show where we discuss issues both African and worldwide which are affecting the continent. And we look at how those issues are seen at home and in the African diaspora. I'm Afua Hirsch and I'm pleased to welcome our panel. Juliana Olayinka, journalist and broadcaster, Lanre Akinola, editor of African Business, and Ayo Johnson, journalist and specialist in African affairs. Welcome everyone. This morning we are talking about the announcement that President Buhari will run for another term. Juliana, what's your first reaction to that news?
First reaction, I wasn't surprised. I think after he came back from the UK last year, after a 3-month health scare, the fact that he came back from there and he came back hale and healthy, I kind of knew that, you know, if you can't kick a man when he's down, he's going to run again. You know, in a short answer, I'm not surprised at all.
Well, Ayo, he has in a way shown his resilience, but at the same time, those questions about his age and his health haven't gone away, have they?
It doesn't really matter. He's saying, I'm ready. He's saying, I'm fit, I'm well. As far as he's concerned, he could have been sick previously, but now he's fit to go. And besides, he's trying to send a clear message that if he stands, he's probably going to win, and the Nigerian public should try and embrace him.
Lanre, very positive reactions we're getting so far to this news. I can always rely on you to be a bit countercultural. What are your thoughts?
I'm afraid I have to disappoint. I think it's good news in context. I don't think it's sort of objectively great news. Many Nigerians will have very mixed feelings about it, but overall, given what's been happening in the country, I think it's not the worst thing that could happen.
And is that because you think Nigeria needs some consistency in leadership, or do you think that Buhari does have something to offer that Nigeria really needs right now?
I think there are two things. One is that continuity, which is really needed in Nigeria. Two, I think that people have exaggerated the economic issues that, you know, or sort of exaggerated how much Buhari has contributed to economic issues on the continent. I think that people have really overblown that, and that his track record is better than a lot of people are willing to admit.
That notion there of him being better is really because even when he was ill, he had a team that was still delivering. He had a vice president that was really capable, and all the issues, be it Boko Haram, the Niger Delta issue, or the economy as a whole, have really not gone as bad as people had expected. So for that reason, I think people are saying, better the person you know than someone else who's unknown, untested, untried, and clearly he's shown tenacity.
Just quickly, which also raises the question of what's the alternative? And that's an important part that we have to ask, right? So who are the challengers? Who are the potential contenders? And when you look at that, it's not like I would say Nigeria is not facing a particularly profound choice in 2019. And given the last 4 years, again, I think could do much worse than Buhari staying in power,
I want to come back to some of the bigger questions about how well Nigerian democracy is doing overall. But Juliana, I feel like playing devil's advocate a little bit here, because for the past year we've sat here and talked about the fact that Nigeria needed somebody who was very present and capable as a leader, and there was so much concern when so much of last year Buhari was absent in London on medical leave. So it's interesting to hear you now all saying such positive things about him. Just looking at some of the specifics about what he has achieved. Corruption is often the thing that people talk about, that he made big promises towards when he was elected. Do you feel that he has lived up to expectations in his track record on tackling corruption in Nigeria?
Yeah, he has, because we've all seen it. You know, I think we have to be very careful, especially in Nigeria. Trial by media, even though we're journalists, that's something that happens a lot and can be very dangerous, especially when it comes to an election. But I want to answer your question, but not avoid it. But going back slightly, I don't think it's going to be an easy task for Buhari at all whatsoever. You know, the APC is really a coalition of previous parties. The PDP all ran in there, ANC, various others. And a lot of them were told that Buhari was going to be a one-term leader. He said it himself that he was only going to go for one term. And there are people, younger people in the north. We have Bukola Saraki in the Senate. We have El Rufai in Kaduna, who are all looking for that presidency role. And I'm not sure if they're going to necessarily give him the ticket, because he still has to win the ticket in APC. So he has confirmed that he will run again. But the APC party haven't confirmed that he will actually be the runner. So there are going to be a lot of people within APC. Bola Asiwaju Tinubu is one of them, who's been trying to get the party together to come behind Buhari. So I think the story's going to run. I don't think it's as simple as Buhari said he's going to, go against it and he will get the ticket. I think, the story about who is going to defect from APC into another party to be a strong opposition is going to be the story that lingers on.
And we don't know yet what's going to happen in that respect, but we do know what's happened over the last 3-4 years. So just coming back to that initial question, how has Buhari lived up to the expectations around his ability to tackle corruption?
I think the key here is the people will decide. So the party has got to decide whether he's the man for them. We have to see that. The people would then decide if he is the right president for them. So there's a lot of things that are outside of his capabilities, but I think it messes around with the rotation system which we've seen in Nigerian politics between one term, it's a Muslim leader, then it's the next term, it's a Christian leader. How is that dynamic's going to shift? And whether the Christian populace and their political affiliates would accept that as Buhari coming a second time within that mix, which we've seen previously operational with other parties. So that's one. And also, is Buhari strong enough, fit enough? Is the population going to warm up to him? We are yet to see all of this. So how much of bad publicity is going to affect him? This is a man who's seen it all. He's seen the worst, he's heard the worst, he's been hit with the worst, and he's still here. So maybe nothing can really shake him.
Lanre, we talk a lot about corruption. Is that really the overriding issue facing Nigeria? We know, and we've talked on this show about the serious debt problems facing Nigeria. There are lots of pressing issues around the economy. Has Buhari demonstrated a capable leadership as far as the economic and growth prospects are concerned?
Not to the level that he needed to. But, you know, these things always have to be considered in context. In the context that Nigeria has found itself in, it could have been so much worse. And I think under some alternatives, it would have been worse. Now, on key things like corruption, he hasn't lived up to expectations, but it was always going to be difficult for him to live up to expectations. They were overblown in a very similar way that expectations were massively overblown for Obama back in 2008 and 2009. It was never going to be what people sort of had imagined. That said, he surrounded himself with competent people. We can't forget that. Nigeria is not a one-person state. It's not just Buhari. His cabinet is full of people who I would say are, you know, quite competent in their fields and interested in driving some change. But the management of the economy hasn't been great. But that hasn't been helped by the falling oil prices. I mean, they inherited, you know, the worst oil slump in decades. So it was always going to be extremely tough for them. It needs to be better in the second term, if there is a second term. You know, we've been discussing that. It's not a done deal. It has to improve. But point to me the alternative that's done better. Point to me the precedent that's done better to Buhari. I can't think of one, you know. So it's sort of like, you know, is it being perfect? No. But, you know, what's the alternative? Who's going to come in and demonstrate it's going to be done better? I'm not convinced that those people are around.
Let's be honest about it. At that level, you're not really running the country, really. Most presidents don't. They're figureheads. They have teams behind them. They've got personalities behind them. They have a huge engine that pushes all the agendas and address. All they're there really is a figure of speech at the right time. And no, but let's be honest about it. Let's be honest about it. Even in any country, whether you take the United States, Donald Trump, for example, you think he manages the government?
But we're also seeing the potential for a leader to take a country in a specific direction. America's a good example of that.
But who dictates that policy?
Right now. Juliana, Buhari has done things to address the security situation in Nigeria. He has been visiting the north when we have had Boko Haram attacks, abductions. Do you think that he has demonstrated firm leadership as far as the threat of terrorism and security goes?
Well, yes, if we look at Dapchi and the kidnapping of those girls,
and
you know,
he visited
and there are certain zones that previous presidents haven't gone to, Buhari has gone to, and also as well, we know that I think with the Nigerian presidency in particular, you have to have a collaboration. So, you know, you have to win if the South vote for you, the Southeast, the North and the Northeast, and he has had those votes. We've seen previous presidents before who haven't even won in their own region, and Buhari was able to do that. So I think he has shown that he can pull people together. I think with terrorism and security, which is huge, you know, I think Boko Haram are still not running riot, but they are still obviously a visible threat to the north. But I think that the fact that he's been able to visit those places and the fact that, you know, the Dapchi girls were released, I think has shown that, you know, he is able to tackle some things.
Just very quickly, we're almost at the break, but Lanre, do you think that President Buhari has been able to overcome some of the skepticism among Christians, Southern Christians, about his background, you know, about his perceived stance on Islamism in the past. Has he managed to successfully overcome those doubts?
I don't know is the answer. I can't speak for the Christian community in Nigeria. And I'd be surprised if that, if that's a non-issue, because those divisions are much bigger than Buhari again. The religious divisions are often symptomatic of political divisions and political agendas. I would say overall, he has done a good job at not dividing the country.
I have to cut you off
sorry,
there.
yeah,
It's time to take a quick break now, but we do, as you can see, have plenty more to discuss. So please join us in a few moments. Hello and welcome back to Journalist Hangout UK. I'm Afua Hirsch and I'm pleased to welcome back our panel, Ayo Johnson, Juliana Olayinka and Lanre Akinola. Welcome back everyone. Before the break we were talking about the track record of Buhari's last term in office, but now I want to ask you what you would like to see going forward. Lanre, what do we want for next term, for next Nigerian president?
Well, what I would want as the next Nigerian president is someone like Nelson Mandela. What we need, that's not going to happen. What we need is institutionalization, which is very boring, it's very technical, but that is the single biggest problem that most African countries have is weak institutions. And if Buhari can do one thing, if he's done one thing in his first 4 years, and if he can do one thing if he gets another term, in that term, it is to drive institutional consolidation. Because Nigeria cannot depend on individuals, it needs stronger public institutions.
Is that something that can be achieved in a 4-year term from somebody who, as Ayo pointed out, is not a dictator, is having to negotiate a system where power is distributed through different bodies? Juliana, is a 4-year term enough for anybody to really drive the kind of change Nigeria needs?
Yeah, I think so. Not because you're supposed to be a president or a head of state for your country, not for yourself. So you're doing things to hand over, to pass on. Whether they're right or wrong, the next government then comes to fix it. And I think that could be one of our biggest problems, I think, and also as well with the lack of opposition, which Lanre has rightly pointed out. The PDP are too bothered in, infighting and winning back power, not putting and holding the government to account. So you have people on the streets doing that when we need an opposition to be doing that, to ask the right questions, to be driving forward. So I don't think the 4 years is the problem. It's just the legacy of a previous government and not scoring points and playing politics, but actually trying to build the society. I want more for Nigeria. I think all Nigerians want more. I want to see us looked better in foreign relations. I want people to look at Nigerians and not be thinking, oh God, are they duping me or are they doing this? But to see Nigerians as a strong man of Africa and, the diversification of the economy, not doing it because, oil prices are down, but just trying to diversify.
We're speaking on the eve of the Commonwealth Summit. Buhari will be here in London, meeting with other Commonwealth leaders, with the Archbishop of Canterbury. Ayo, has he been able to earn the confidence of the international community and help change Nigeria's image in a global context?
Even if he hadn't, the fact that the sympathy factor is one that would come to his aid, because people have seen that he's been ill previously and he's recovered and he's wanting to push himself further to take that mantle again. So that sympathy vote, which I expect he will get locally at home, internationally, and very much so in the circles that you're talking about, would happen. I think compounding that, we must remember that the APC is a very young party, and they in itself is the point, because that's why the PDP cannot really hold them to account, because
APC is young, but the people within it are not young.
Yes, but the party itself is
It's
young.
almost a coalition party.
It's a youthful party nonetheless. So it has its challenges in trying to get together. And of course, the PDP party, which has been there for yonks, is trying to come to terms with what happened, the shock reality of the fact that no more in power, and they've got to fight back, and they're not sort of ready for that. So I think Buhari is sort of playing around with all of this. He knows the gameplay. He's been there before. He understands he's got the sympathy vote, and he's going to make sure he makes capital out of it.
I've never heard of a sympathy vote before.
Well, there is a sympathy vote.
They wouldn't be voting for Buhari because of sympathy.
Well, they will because of the fact that, you must remember, Africans vote, one, because they see people who are slightly smarter, sharper, and of course the age factor is a major factor in African play anyway. The older you are, the wiser they think you are. In European circles, they think that the older you are, the less likely you are so. So that comes to play.
Lanre, Nigeria, as we've talked about this before, but it's so important, is a country with a young population. We have government by old men, not just in Nigeria, but across Africa, almost without exception at the moment. Is that a problem in itself?
Yeah, so very quick comment on the 4-year terms. I think it is a problem to do anything meaningful in terms of reform and long-term planning. 4 years is nothing, because after the first 2 years, you're already working towards the next election. And no matter how good you are, no matter how dedicated you are, that's going to hamstring you.
But then you get criticised for staying.
No, but yeah. So it's an open debate, one. But I think it definitely is an issue now in terms of the second question. Sorry, what was the second question?
The second question was about age and the fact that Nigeria has such a young population.
It is a big issue. The average age in Nigeria is 18. The population is almost 200 million, 18. Buhari 75. Atiku Abubakar, his likely opponent, is what, 72, 73, something like that. That gap, and given the technology-driven age that we live in and the age of rapid change, it has to be a problem. Not necessarily, and it doesn't have to be terminal, but you have to be able to relate to the world we live in. And I think that is questionable, and there's nothing personal against Buhari. So yeah, there is a need for fresh leadership, which is why I think, I come back to the point I made in the first half, Nigeria could do much worse. That's not an endorsement, it's a sort of acceptance of the realities on the ground.
I've noticed some very lively debates in kind of African political circles lately about countries like Rwanda, where they are not having transfers of power regularly. I think many people aspire to the fact that it looks very functional. The streets are clean. Everyone comments on the fact the electricity is so reliable, it's attracting investment. Is there an appetite, do you think, in Africa for people to question this model of multi-party democracy, of this kind of endless cycle of elections? Obviously, Buhari himself has been involved in military dictatorship before. It's not something that's not been tried. But Ayo, do you think that there is grounds to question whether this very Western model of multi-party, constant elections is really what a country like Nigeria actually needs?
Not necessarily, no. I think the Rwanda model is the one that I really love. Paul Kagame has done really well. For me, as far as I'm concerned, he can stay there forever. If you're doing as much as you're doing, the way you're doing it, and everyone's really respecting that, he can stay there. And if Nigeria, as far as I'm concerned, can develop, evolve like Rwanda has since 1994 when they had their problems, I think Buhari and anybody who has been able to achieve that can stay forever, in my view.
Nigeria can't be compared to Rwanda.
No, but I'm just saying, but she brought them Rwanda.
I would challenge
it's a model, which I like.
Challenge that, because if you look at the human rights situation in Rwanda, for example, people say that stability has been achieved at the expense of civil rights, journalists and opposition leaders who have been jailed or exiled.
Not every time you need civil rights.
Well, let me ask you, Juliana, in terms of human rights, civil liberties, has Buhari helped Nigeria gain a reputation as a country where these democratic principles are being protected?
They are, because Nigerians are, sorry to use the word, woke. I think Nigeria, we're not going to have a situation in Nigeria that we had in Azerbaijan earlier this week where, 89% of the population just blindly voted for somebody who's been in power for a long time. Nigerians are constantly speaking. I've never, ever heard about the internet being shut down. Nigerians know very much what's going on the ground and who they want to vote for, what they want, their rights. They may not always be implemented, but I'm not sure that human rights and civil liberties have been a huge problem in Nigeria as it is in other parts of Africa. I know there are still problems in the north and in various parts of Nigeria with employment and, being able to get good access to health. But I think Nigerians are very much aware of what they want. And if it's not happening, they get out on the streets and they say they want it. They're not going to rely on their leader to tell them and dictate to them. I don't think so.
And I haven't seen anyone out in the street saying we do not want Buhari.
Well, Lanre, let me ask you, no one can question whether Nigerians take part in democracy, and elections are quite something to behold in Nigeria. Is there enthusiasm for the next election? And has Buhari himself been able to overcome really quite a remarkable legacy, having been a military dictator himself, albeit briefly, in the 80s? Are his democratic credentials now beyond question?
These are big questions. There is a lot of work that needs to be done. I'm going to go back to this, it's boring, that needs to be done on strengthening institutions in Nigeria. A lot of the democratic activism is quite superficial. It's superficial not because there isn't a lack of passion or interest or desire to have more meaningful representation, but because Nigeria doesn't have the right kind of movements. Its labor unions are basically, I mean, I got to choose my words carefully here. They're like organized groups that don't necessarily represent the interests of the workers, and the political parties are non-ideological elite coalitions. So the underlying need is to strengthen institutions, because that energy, I don't think, is necessarily translating into any meaningful pressure on government and any meaningful pressure in terms of holding governments to account. Not for lack of desire, but for lack of the right institutions.
And Juliana, you've said a number of times in the show that the opposition is not working properly in Nigeria and holding the government to account. How important is that when we're looking at the next term?
It's vital, because then it's the people that do it. We can't play social media politics. It's not, WhatsApp groups, and I'm in loads of them, and everybody's talking about this is what we need to do. We need to be there, we need to be here, and it's on Twitter. Where are the PDP? Stop infighting. Stop, talking about corruption. Start building an opposition that is going to hold the government to account. And if you don't have that there, you have people doing it on the streets, and it's not fair.
So much more to talk about, but it's time to finish now today. Don't forget to follow us at RealJHUK on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. I'm Afua Hirsch. From the entire team here in London, goodbye. And thank you for watching Journalist Hangout UK.